Welcome, those of you that are just joining us. If you're just joining and you haven't heard me say it yet, please go ahead and find that chat box. It's going to be at the top or bottom of your screen. If you don't see it in the toolbar, go over to More. The drop box will have a chat option, and go ahead and open that up and say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear from you. Hi, Hannah from Portland. Welcome. Well, we are excited to be sharing Harney County with everyone. Barbara, also from Seattle. Wonderful. Hi, Donna. Hi, Janice. Welcome back. Good morning. Okay, so we're just a minute after. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the 40th annual Harney County Migratory Bird Festival. We are so excited to be able to offer these programs virtually. This morning's presentation is some more history and archaeology of Harney County with Scott Thomas, retired BLM archaeologist. So the Migratory Bird Festival, it takes place every year because of the enthusiasm and support of our community planning group. And that is everyone from federal agencies and, local businesses, nonprofit organizations, and community individuals. So we're just really thrilled to be able to work throughout the year to make these programs possible. So, who am I? I am Janelle Wicks. I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, and as a member of the Harney County Migratory Bird Festival Planning Committee, I'm very excited to be your host. What you can expect out of this presentation is about 40 minutes of program, and then some time for question and answer. Please remain muted throughout the presentation. This is going to help with feedback and white noise. If someone gets unmuted, I will be going through and checking and force muting things. So if you accidentally get unmuted and you can't figure out how to mute yourself back up, it's okay. I'll get you back. In the meantime, please feel free to type your questions and comments in the chat box. We love to have a little bit of discussion going on there. And then I will moderate the question and answer at the end of the presentations. Okay. So Scott Thomas has earned his Bachelor's of Science in Zoology from OSU in 1975 and a Master's of Arts in Anthropology from Portland State in 1982. He worked for 24 years for the Burns BLM office and retired in 2018. His research interests are varied, and they include the Clovis age sites, buffalo hunting circa 1500 AD, edible plant harvest, the 17-year-old Rimrock Draw, Rimrock Shelter, and prehistoric pottery, all here in Harney County, along with public archaeology. In his spare time, you might find Scott gardening, surf fishing, or fashioning a willow basket. Today, Scott is going to be presenting on ancient cultures in Harney County, the Clovis research from 2003 to 2021, and late prehistoric buffalo hunters of southeastern Oregon. Please, again, remain muted for the duration of the program and add your questions and comments to the chat box. There is going to be a short question and answer at the end of the session. This program is being recorded, so if you have an aversion to having your video caught in the screen, please go ahead and take your video off. And without further ado, Scott Thomas.
Thank you very much, Janelle. I'm going to take a few seconds here to switch screens so I could show you my presentation. And I wanted to mention one thing. Janelle talked about a 17-year-old archaeological site called Rimrock Draw. It's actually 17,000 years old. It's the oldest site in North America, but I won't be talking about that today. I'm not sure why exactly, other than I didn't choose it as a topic. My first discussion will be about Clovis. And I don't want to assume that you all know all about Clovis, but I also don't want to assume you know nothing about Clovis. So what we're going to do is go through a little bit of what Clovis is, and then talk about its implications for actually all of North America, some Middle America. So this cover shot shows you, it's an interesting shot a friend of mine took on the front of his white Ford pickup truck. But the way he got the lighting and the shadows really worked out. All of these points, if you look at them, you'll see there's a sort of a concavity running down the middle of them. And that's a classic sign of Clovis points. Clovis points are made, and I'll go to another slide and show you a little more about this. I think I will. Uh-oh. I'm having technical difficulties. No, I'm on my PowerPoint, but I can't get it to go forward or backward. Maybe I need to go back out a second here. Sorry, everyone. Okay. Sorry for the pause. I went to this one. Is that just one shot of the? I'm gonna go this one then. Okay, we'll go back into the slideshow. Thank you for. Oh, come on. There we go. I think we're back on. Can everybody hear me now? Nod your heads. Everybody hear me? Okay, good.
Yeah, you're great, Scott.
I'm not sure why this is not going. Just see if Janelle can bring it up on hers. Janelle, can you bring it up on yours? My PowerPoint's
Yeah, I
not
can
good.
do that. That's not a problem. 1 second.
Sorry for the interruption, folks. Oh, there we go. That's the slide I wanted. Can you forward them for me, Janelle, when I say next, please?
I can do that for you.
Sorry.
No
This illustration on the right-hand side is a Clovis point that was found near a place called Glass Buttes. It's a gigantic obsidian source between Burns and Bend. At any rate, it's just one of the ones I'm going to show you. But you can see this little concavity in the middle of the point, and where it says flute. That's where the flake has been taken off so that it makes the point thinner. And I'll read what I have here. I'm sorry, I'm reading. These points are unique in appearance because of the fluting flakes that are produced at the base of the point and make the point thinner in their midline for hafting on a spear shaft. The lithic technology way of making flake stone tools is unique and uses techniques most commonly found in Europe about 16,000 years ago. Certain flake types and other clues can identify Clovis technology. Clovis points are found everywhere in North America, probably more so on the East Coast than on the West Coast. In fact, up until 2003, we thought they were very rare around here, and they really are rare, but they aren't quite as rare as we thought because we started specifically looking for them and found them in much more numbers than we thought we would. Anyway, they have been dated in North America to a period of 13,250 to 12,080 years ago. They are more common in eastern US than the western, like I said. Clovis spear points have been associated with kill sites involving extinct Pleistocene animals such as mammoths, camels, horses, and bison. Up until 2003, a few of these points had been found on Burns BLM district, but we were able to find many more in a concerted effort looking for them. Next. There's a a photograph. Here's a photograph, kind of a montage of Clovis points. And in the background, you can see some early Americans trying to kill a mammoth. Unfortunately, we don't have a mammoth kill on the district that I know of, but we do have evidence of bison and camel and other extinct animals being hunted by not necessarily just Clovis people, but people that were here about the same time. But this Clovis point on the top of the screen is one made in near where Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah come together, and it's part of a cache, which means a whole collection of stuff found together, and it's a beautiful point. But it shows you the fluting scar really well. Next slide. Second, we need to learn a little bit about Clovis lithic technology. This part of it is a little bit difficult to describe, and some people find it hard to visualize. In fact, many of the people we've trained to look for these particular kinds of artifacts have had trouble getting their head around it. But Clovis flint knappers used a flake making method called overshot flaking to reduce the thickness of toolstone cores and bifaces. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a large piece of what looks like chert or flint that has been flaked by a modern flint knapper. And you'll see there is a flake that goes all the way from one side of the artifact to the other side. And that's what overshot flake is. The French term, I guess, is outrepassé, which I think means overpass or overshot. At any rate, this technique was not used by much later flint knappers in North America, and it's a clear sign of Clovis lithic technology. When we look for Clovis sites, we look for overshot flakes, overshot bifaces like the one on the right-hand side of your screen, and fluting flakes, which is they're even more difficult to describe, in addition to Clovis spear points. These two artifacts, fluting flakes are called Clovis diagnostics. Their presence means that the site may be Clovis age, even if Clovis points are not found there. And the illustration on the lower left is an illustration of a flake found at a place called Sage Hen Gap, which is a site about 17 miles west of Burns, right off Highway 20. And it's our largest Clovis site on the district, and we have found 12 Clovis points there, plus lots of fluting flakes overshot by. All pieces of the Clovis technology are all together at that one site. There's only one other site in Oregon that has more information, and that's a site on nearby Lakeview BLM district called the Deet site, and they had over 100 Clovis points found there, along with all these other little artifacts that I've been discussing. Next slide. Here's a few more examples of overshot flaking and what overshot bifaces look like. The two artifacts on the right-hand side are part of that cache that I was telling you about that was found near Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah, called the Fenn cache. And those two overshot bifaces in the photograph, if you look at the center of that photograph, you'll see the thinness of those artifacts. Those artifacts are incredibly wafer thin, but very large. And of course, I think they're beautiful. The technique to make those overshots is not easy. A lot of times would end up in a broken one, break it in half. The fact that these people were able to flint knap these items is pretty astounding. And there are theories about how Clovis technology got to North America. And like I said earlier, the techniques used to make Clovis were not in North America before really or after Clovis. And basically they are very similar to techniques used in Europe. And there is a theory that the Clovis technology got to the United States via people hunting in the ice along between Greenland and mainland Europe, and ended up in the United States. And that's why there are so many different Clovis sites and artifacts in states on the eastern seaboard, comparatively compared to the west coast. Next slide. We have a group of volunteers that join us every summer since 2003 to look specifically for Clovis spear points and sites. This is an example of what we found in 2002. It was our best effort in our 2-week period. We found 5 Clovis spear points, 2 at sites that we'd already found Clovis at, and 3 at 2 new sites. And this is kind of an interesting illustration because Clovis people tended to have a preference for making these tools out of something besides obsidian. And in this picture, you'll see 5 different points, and only one of them is made out of obsidian. The rest of them are made out of chert, which is really unusual in this part of the world because there are obsidian sources everywhere. Harney County, actually, eastern Oregon from the Cascades east, is full of obsidian quarries, places where they could get obsidian. The most exciting find probably was the Swan Lake Clovis, which is in the center of the photograph. 2 people that had never even seen a Clovis point found each half of this point about 15 feet apart. And you can imagine how thrilled they were. It made their whole summer. Next slide. This is a topographic view of Harney County, and it shows you where all those artifacts were located from about 80,000 feet. But you can see they're all clustered to the west of Burns, but we've found Clovis and elsewhere. I have a map at the very end of the presentation that's a little bit difficult to read because it's so small a print, but hopefully you'll be able to decipher it. Next slide. And then on our district, in Burns district, there is another type of Clovis, and we call it the Clovis variant, which isn't a very interesting name necessarily, but there's only one other point or spear point that we know that is related to these, and it was found in Nevada, and we chose not to give it the same name as these points, so we call them Clovis variants. But the point style is technologically very similar to Clovis and is found in several locations on Burns BLM managed lands. It has not been reported elsewhere in the Great Basin, and for those of you that don't know precisely what the Great Basin is, it's a huge internally drained basin between basically Burns in the north and Southern California in the south. Anyway, it has not been reported elsewhere in Great Basin, except at one site in central Nevada. It is about half the size of a typical Clovis point and appears to date to just after Clovis at around 12,500 years ago. We have really 2 spots on the district where these points are found, and both of them are around the edges of ancient lakes that are now dry. Some in the Alvord Desert and some around a place called Lake on the Trail, which is up in the northwest part of the district, west of Burns. Next slide. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen a Folsom point. We have never seen them here on the ground anyway, but all over North America, besides maybe the west part of the West Coast, Folsom was the spear point that replaced Clovis. And it was very technologically similar to Clovis and probably about 60% of the size of a typical Clovis point. However, Folsom points are not found in Oregon. It is my theory that the Clovis variants shown in the last slide replaced Clovis points because they were more suited to smaller game animals after the last large Pleistocene animals became extinct. See, the Clovis kind of ended, and Folsom and Clovis variant kind of started all at the time when many of the large, what they call megafauna from the Pleistocene were going extinct. And when you have a technology that's for killing large animals, and all of a sudden the large animals are, not all of a sudden, but gradually the large animals are no longer available, then you switch your technology to match the size of the quarry. And for me, that would be making something smaller, but in similar technology. Elsewhere in the United States, Clovis points were replaced by Folsom points instead. And that's pretty much true of the entire United States. Next slide. Here's that map I was telling you about. In 2003, this map was almost blank. 2 places on it where we knew we could find Clovis technology. And this is a map, I think I drew it in 2016 in GIS. And this is a map of all the Clovis and Clovis variant sites and isolated points that we found in the district. And as you can see, the number has dramatically increased because we've been specifically looking for them. And as you can see, it's probably not they probably are not as rare as we thought. But this has kind of opened up a whole new part of research in Eastern Oregon, because up until we started looking really hard for Clovis, the only site we knew about was the one, the Dietz site on Lakeview District. And now we have a lot more information on where the Clovis points, where people that use Clovis points moved, where they got their obsidian when they used it, and where they would locate their camps on the land. And you've got to remember, at the end of the Pleistocene, things were much moister and cooler here, so that there would have been running water and vegetation would have been a lot more varied, and resources probably were a lot more varied. More choices for them to live. That's about all I have on Clovis. I hope I've been able to illustrate what Clovis points are, and the people that they were associated with still don't know a whole lot about, because it was so long ago. At any rate, that's all I have. If there's any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Hi, so folks, if you want to chat a question in the chat box or comment for Scott before we move on to the next topic, feel free. Any questions about Clovis time period or technologies? Okay, Scott, what sort of tools were used to make the points?
The points were roughed out, probably using what they call a hammerstone. It would have been a stone that was harder and tougher than the material they were plaking. They would rough out a kind of a knife-shaped oval, what they call a preform, and the Clovis folks tended to carry these preforms around with them and use them for lots of other things besides the actual spear point, until those preforms were reduced to the size that what they would want to make for a spear, and then they'd make a spear out of it. So it was kind of like they were a handy tool for a lot of different things, until they finally, at the end of the technology, they were made into spear points. The tools used to make the fluting flakes and the overshots they could have used hammerstones, but it's more likely they used antler or bone as the point of contact, and then they'd hit
There are 4 people
antler or bone with a rock, with a stone.
That would be great.
That's how they used to make them. But they were not easy to make. The fluting especially was difficult to make, and especially difficult with obsidian, because obsidian is more brittle than chert.
Awesome. Scott Strickland asks that there's a lot of Clovis in Logan Valley. Are they related?
Clovis and Logan Valley? Well, I don't know. I have not heard of that. And I unless he has specific knowledge of them there, that'd be great to know. But I don't. If there's Clovis like that with fluted centers like the Clovis are fluted, that would be a new discovery that I haven't heard of, and it'd be great to know. But if they're fluted points and they're large, by large I mean probably 6 inches long by 1.5 to 2 inches wide, that would be good to know. Somebody else was asking about migration.
Yeah, so someone asked, can you give an overview of the peoples we think might have migrated through the area over time and where we think they came from?
Okay, it looks like in the general overview, Clovis spread from the East Coast to the West over time. And it wasn't much time because they've only been dated to the period 13,250 to about 12,800 and some. So we're talking about a very short matter of time, at least in the overall sense. We think they migrated west, even though the original Clovis site that was first written about is in Clovis, New Mexico. But still, if you look at the density of Clovis points and Clovis sites by state or by county, actually, in the United States, it's clearly weighted to the east side. And that gives the theory about them coming from Europe more credibility, although, that is not necessarily the most popular view of where Clovis people came from. A lot of people think that they came over the ice-free bridge from northern Asia through Alaska and down the ice-free corridor. The only problem with this is that the ice-free corridor wasn't all that ice-free, and it was pretty bad climate-wise all the way from Bering Straits to continental United States. Plus, if the Clovis had come into the Midwest, say like Colorado, Wyoming, that part of the world, maybe south of there, you would expect the Clovis to spread both ways and to be the highest density maybe in that area, and that isn't the case. But the biggest question about migration is the thought is that, and this is kind of a generalized theory, the thought is that Clovis arrived in the West when there are already people here using other kinds of spear points to kill their prey. And I didn't include one of these in the slide, and I wish I had them now, but we have a site at Rimrock Draw that's 17,000 years old. Well, that's 4,000 years before Clovis. Paisley Caves over near Paisley, Oregon has a site that is, let's see, it's 14,300 years old. And so it would be 2,000 years older than, or 1,500 or so older than Clovis. So we know there were people in this part of the world, in central and eastern Oregon, and excuse me, and probably western Oregon too, before Clovis, which kind of puts the whole idea that Clovis was first in North America, kind of puts it on its head. So the idea is that Clovis utilized, people who use Clovis technology basically met with people that were using a different kind of technology and probably met them right about where I am sitting now in eastern Oregon, eastern California, northwestern Nevada, so on like that.
Great. And so we also had a question about the people who lived in the area, presumably the Wadadaka band of the Paiute tribe. Did they migrate seasonally, or were they in the area year round?
They migrated within the area year round. They had I think a 6,000 square miles is what I think I've read, and I know I've tried to plot it on a map, but their annual round would have taken them within about a 6,000 square mile area. But they would stay in certain places for a length of time. For instance, I talked yesterday about edible plants, and there are root gathering camps in the hills east of Burns that were accessible to salmon fishing in the Malheur River. And I would bet, based on the amount of roots up there and the timing when you can dig them, they would have been in those camps for probably 2 months a year, maybe 3. And then they move on to a different place depending on what was in season in terms of vegetation and where animals were more likely to gather. In fact, we've done surveys on top of Steens Mountain at 9,700 feet and found oodles of sites. And I'm sure it's because every one of those sites is somewhere near a snow melt lake where big game would come to water. So we have sites on the Steens that date back to about the time it was deglaciated, around 9,000 years ago.
Wow. I think this next question from Helen is really a good one and an important one to build context for understanding about federal agencies. So Helen asks, is the BLM the primary agency sponsoring archaeological research in the area?
Well, yes and no. The Forest Service, which is mostly north of Burns, the Malheur National Forest, they have some interesting research going on. Most right now focused on Chinese mining from the late 1800s, between 1860 and 1910. But they're doing some really nice work on the Chinese efforts in mining after the big, gold boom in the 1860s. So they do that. They do Passports in Time, which is a volunteer operation where they can volunteer to go and help excavate or do survey on Forest Service land. And I participated in that when I worked for the Forest Service briefly back in the 90s. But BLM clearly has, Burns BLM has, and Lakeview BLM, those two districts, Lakeview being west of here, they have probably more research going on than anywhere in Oregon. And it's all sponsored by BLM, but also sponsored by universities that are involved. Right now, there's University of Oregon works on Burns District and works on Lakeview District. University of Nevada, Reno works on Lakeview District. We have Texas A&M working up here near Harney Lake, where we're working on a site that's 12,500 years old. So we have plenty of partners. It's slowed down a little in the last year because of COVID. The universities weren't allowing field schools, but it looks like at least University of Oregon will be working at Rimrock Draw this summer with a field school.
Awesome, thank you for that.
Yeah, and part of the whole research deal, and I'm not going to take credit for this exactly, but I'm a real, I guess I'm very curious, and I put patterns together pretty well in my head. So I've been a real firm, and the woman that took my place is the same way. We really want to see research going on. In fact, that's part of our mission. Even though you sometimes wouldn't know it, at least half of our job is supposed to be associated with public outreach and research on archaeological topics.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it makes it made my job a lot more interesting than what it would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I bet. And, does anyone else have any more questions for Scott about either of these topics? I do want to mention that you can get more of Scott annually at the Bird Festival in person when we return to in-person festivals, and online in our Prairie Songs for a Feathered Heart mystery treasure search, which is interactive. Scott has a featured video in that program as well. And I just want to mention all of our partners that make the Bird Festival possible every year are nonprofit organizations, including the Friends of Malheur, Portland Audubon, High Desert Partnership, and our local government agencies like the Bureau of Land Management and Fish and Wildlife Service, local businesses, and community members. So we're really fortunate to have such a enthusiastic and committed group of people engaged in this process of bringing the festival to you every year.
Thank you, Gretchen.
What was that, Scott?
I said thanks to Gretchen. She gave us a thumbs up.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for participating and joining us this morning. Thank you so much, Scott, for your time and for sharing so much of your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me.